nearly 7 feet tall. The bride the rancher ordered filled the whole doorway. The letter said 5'4". I still have it somewhere, folded in the back of the Bible I don't read much anymore. The one that sits on the nightstand with the cracked spine and the pressed wildflower Dora put there before she died. That letter from the agency in St. Louis said the woman's name was Maren Voss, age 31, formerly of Hanover, Germany, lately of Omaha, Nebraska, speaks good English, strong constitution, willing to work, 5'4". I am 6'1" in my socks. Wasn't sure I needed a woman who could look me in the eye, but I wasn't sure I minded it either. What I got was something else entirely. The stage came into Cutter's Fork on a Thursday, late October, the kind of late October afternoon where the light goes flat and mean and the dust doesn't settle, just hangs there like it's got nothing better to do. I told Delbert at the livery I'd be picking someone up, which meant by the time that stage creaked to a stop in front of Haverford's Dry Goods, half the town was watching from under hat brims and porch awnings and between curtains. That's Cutter's Fork. There are 400 people in that town, and on a dull Thursday, every one of them will find a reason to be outdoors. The door of the stage swung open and a man got out, then a woman with a baby, then a drummer with 2 cases, and then nothing, and I thought, well, miscommunication, missed connection, she's not on it. And then the stage actually tilted. Not much, just an inch maybe less, the way a wagon will settle when a horse shifts its weight, and then Maren Voss stepped down. I'm not going to say nearly 7 feet because that's what the county said afterward, and the county was, as usual, wrong. She was 6'3", maybe an inch more. A big-boned German woman with a face that looked like it had been quarried somewhere cold and serious, broad across the cheekbones, jaw like the flat of a hand, hair the color of creek mud pinned up so tight it looked painful. She wore a gray traveling dress with a brown collar, and she carried one bag, just the one, and she stood there in the street and looked around Cutter's Fork the way a man looks at a horse he's been sold and isn't sure about yet. Then she looked at me. I don't know what my face was doing. Nothing good, probably. I was doing the arithmetic, the way a man does when the situation has already outrun his preparation, and the arithmetic was not in my favor. She took 3 steps across the ruts toward me and held out her hand, not to be taken, not limp-wristed and waiting, but straight out, palm sideways, the way you'd greet a business partner, and she said, "You are Callum Wrist." It wasn't a question. I shook her hand. Her grip was, it was like shaking hands with another man, not rough, just sure. "I am," I said. She nodded once, good. That was it, no apology for the height, no explanation. She picked up her bag and looked at my wagon and then looked at me, waiting for me to take her to it. I heard a laugh from somewhere near Haverford's porch. Didn't look. Told myself it was about something else. Probably wasn't. I had the wrist spread. 2,000 acres east of the Fork, good grass, decent water in dry years, nothing fancy. I'd run it for 11 years alone since Dora went, with Paulk and his boy doing the heavier work and a Mexican woman named Celestina coming twice a week to help with the house. I was 53 years old. My hands were always dirty in the creases no matter how long I scrubbed. I had enough money to not worry and enough silence to make a man think too hard at night. The marriage had been my idea, or more precisely my sister Ida's idea delivered to me as if it were obvious, which it might have been. You need someone, Callum, not a housekeeper. Someone, and Ida had given me the address of the agency and walked out of my kitchen before I could argue, which is what Ida does. I'd written the letter in December, cold December, the kind where the wind comes under every door and the empty chair at the table looks emptier than usual. I'd written it plain and practical, said what I had, what I needed, what I could offer. The agency had written back with 3 names. Maren Voss was the last one I read. It said, widowed, no children, good health, skilled with livestock, fluent in English, reads well. Previously employed as a midwife in Omaha following her husband's death. A midwife, a woman who'd seen more blood and hard truth than most men twice her age. I wrote back and said I was interested. That first week, I did not know what to do with her. She was up before me every morning, which hadn't happened since Dora. I'd come into the kitchen still pulling my suspenders up, and she'd be at the stove, and there'd be coffee already made and biscuits either done or close to it. And she'd give me a look that wasn't unfriendly but wasn't warm either, the look of someone who has assessed the situation and found it manageable. She didn't talk much. Neither do I, so we had a lot of quiet mornings. On the fourth day, she walked out to the corral without asking and watched me work the roan I'd been trying to gentle for 3 weeks, a horse with a bad history and a mean eye. And when I got thrown the second time, she didn't flinch or make a sound, just watched me pick myself up and go back and do it again. When I finally had him standing still under me, when I finally felt him give, she said from the fence, "He does not trust. He has been hit from the right side." "How do you know?" She nodded at the horse. "Watch his ear." I watched his ear. She was right. The town took about 2 weeks to get its comments organized. It started at the feed store. I was picking up a sack of oats, and Roy Clendenin, who has an opinion about everything and the good sense to use none of it, said, loud enough, to the man beside him. Herd wrist's May Lorder came in. Said she could look right over his head without raising her chin. And the man beside him, Ed Prute's boy, laughed, and they both looked at me. I picked up the oat sack, set it in the wagon, came back. "Roy," I said. He straightened up some. Roy was maybe 5'8" and had never once in his life done anything that required more nerve than talking. "You got something to say to me directly. I'm listening. Otherwise, I'd appreciate you keeping Mrs. Voss out of your mouth." He opened his mouth and then closed it. I waited. "Just making conversation," he said. "Find a different subject." I put the second sack in the wagon and drove home. I didn't tell Marin. Didn't seem like information she needed. But Paulk must have heard it and told his boy, who told Celestina, who told half of anyone else. Because 2 days later, when I came back from the east pasture, Marin was at the kitchen table with Celestina, and they were speaking in low voices. And when I walked in, they stopped. And Celestina looked at me a certain way, not accusing, just watching. And I understood I had not kept the story as quiet as I'd thought. Marin said nothing about it. We were 2 months in before the night she found me in the barn. I'd been out there late, not working, just sitting with the old bay mare who'd gone lame in September and hadn't improved much. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I go out to that barn and sit in the bay's stall and think, or don't think, which is better. The bay is 22 years old, which is old for a horse, and she's easy company. Dora used to ride her. I heard the barn door and thought it was Paulk, but it was Marin in her coat and boots with a lantern, and she stopped at the stall door and looked at me sitting on the straw with my back against the wall and the mare's nose on my knee. "I woke," she said. "I saw the light." "Just sitting," I said. She looked at the mare, then at me. Then she came into the stall and sat down on the other side, her back against the opposite wall, long legs bent in front of her because there wasn't room to stretch them out in a stall, and she set the lantern between us. We sat like that a good while. She said, "In Hanover, when I was small, my father had a horse he would not sell, though everyone said he was finished. He sat with him like this." "Did the horse make it?" "No, but my father was glad he stayed." The mare exhaled long and warm and turned her head to look at Marin and then back at me, and I thought, this is a strange life. I thought, it is not a bad one. I want to tell you about December. It was December, and the temperature dropped the way it does out here. Not gradually, just a decision by God or whoever is running the weather. And we had a blizzard come in from the northwest that shut down the Cutter's Fork Road for 9 days and snowed in Paulk and his boy at their place a mile off, and left Marin and me alone on the wrist spread with the animals and the cold and nowhere to be. Day 2, a fence section on the northwest end came down under the snow load, and I had a situation with 4 yearlings in a drift, and I went out in it, which I should not have done alone. And Marin came out after me before I could tell her not to. She worked the fence line with me for 3 hours in blowing snow, did not complain, did not slow, at one point lifted a post that would have taken me 2 tries and set it like she'd been fencing her whole life. Her hands were bleeding when we got back in, cracked across the knuckles, and she stood at the sink running the cold water on them, and I saw her jaw set against whatever it was costing her to hold still. I got the salve from the medicine box. She looked at me when I held it out. "Let me," I said. She put her hands out flat on the table, palms up, and I sat across from her and worked the salve into her knuckles, both hands, slow and careful, the way you'd work at something that mattered. Her hands in mine were enormous, wide across the palm, strong as anything, and there were old scars I hadn't noticed, small ones across the fingertips, the kind a person gets from years of careful work in difficult places. When I was done, I didn't let go right away. Don't know why, just held her hands in mine for a moment. She said, "You do not need to be sorry about the fence." "I'm not sorry about the fence. I got the yearlings out." "Yes," she said, "you did." The way she said it, plain, just the fact of it, no more, hit me somewhere I hadn't expected. There is a thing that happens to a man after enough years alone where he stops noticing the silence, and then there comes a day when the silence is not there, and he notices that instead. I noticed it in January. The house smelled different. That sounds like nothing, but it wasn't nothing. It smelled like food being cooked earlier in the day, like a fire built before dark, like something that, I can only tell you, smelled like someone was there. There was a coat on the hook by the door that wasn't mine. There were boots by the stove that weren't mine. There were mornings where I could hear her in the next room, and I lay in bed a minute longer than I needed to because I wasn't in a hurry to lose the sound of another person living in this house. I had not planned on any of that. The agency had said the marriage would be formal for 6 months before either party was committed, a trial of sorts, language that had seemed sensible to me in December, cold December, writing that letter. It seemed less sensible in January. I didn't know what she wanted. I knew what I wanted, and I was not sure, at 53 with rough hands and more quiet than charm, that I was the shape of it. The town held a social in February, as it does, at the Granger's Hall, fiddle music and tables and reasons to stand around talking when it's too cold to be anywhere else. I'd gone every year since Dora because not going would have meant something, meant a conversation I didn't want to have, meant Ida worrying. I asked Marin if she wanted to come. She thought about it one beat, no more, and said yes. I want to tell you what it was like to walk into Granger's Hall with Marin Voss. There is a moment, stepping through a door into a lit room of people, where you feel the air change. Where the conversations do not stop, but you can feel the attention move, the way you feel a wind even when you can't see what it's moving. I felt that. She felt it too. I know she did, though she did not react to it, just walked in beside me at her full height with her hair done up, and wearing a dark green dress I had not seen before, and she looked like something the wind had carried in from somewhere farther and more serious than Cutter's Fork, Texas. Ida found us inside of 2 minutes. Ida is 5 feet tall and talks enough for 4 people, and has never been afraid of a single thing in her life, and she took one look at Marin and then took her by the arm and said, "Come with me. I want you to meet someone," and walked her off. And Marin looked back at me once over her shoulder briefly, something between a question and a reassurance, and I nodded at her that she was all right. The evening was the evening. There was dancing I didn't participate in. There was the usual business of who was mad at who and whose cattle had crossed whose fence line. Roy Clendenin avoided me. Ed Pruitt's boy watched Marin from across the room in the way men watch something they don't understand, and it comes out looking like contempt. I watched him watch her, and I felt something settle in me, quiet and cold, the way things settle before a resolution. He came near her at the table, not to her, near her, and made some comment to the man beside him, quiet enough that I couldn't hear it, and I saw Marin's shoulders go still. I was across the room in about 4 steps. I got there and I looked at him and I said, "I need you to tell me what you just said." He was 26, Ed Pruitt's boy, big enough to feel confident and young enough to be stupid about it. He said, "Just a comment about the view." I said, "That woman is my wife." It wasn't actually yet true legally, and I knew that and I didn't care. The word was the right one. The boy felt it and looked away. I went back to Marin. She was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before, something that had come up through the usual composure of her face and was sitting there on the surface. "You did not have to do that," she said. "I know," I said. She looked at me a moment longer. Then she turned back to Ida's conversation, but I noticed she moved half a step closer to me and stayed there the rest of the evening. A week after the social, she asked me to sit down at the table, which was how Marin made something formal. Not calling a man's name, not a preamble, just, "Sit down at the table." I sat. She stood at the stove with the coffee and she said, still not looking at me, "I want to tell you something." "All right." I was told before I came by a woman at the agency who I trusted that Westerners are rough men, course, that I should expect little and be prepared to manage. She turned and set the coffee on the table and sat down across from me. Her hands were flat on the table, not fidgeting, just flat. She was describing someone else. I didn't say anything. "You are a hard man," she said. "That is not the same thing." I turned my coffee cup on the table once, watching the grain of the wood. "I would like the 6 months to be the 6 months," she said, "but I would like it to be understood that my intention is not to leave at the end of them." I looked up at her. Her eyes were gray. I'd noticed that before. Gray with something darker at the center, and she was looking at me the way she'd looked at that roan horse in the corral, steady and direct, a look that saw what was actually there and not what it wished was there. "I'm not planning to leave either," I said. She nodded once, that same nod as the first day, just the one, like a thing had been agreed. The bay mare died in March. I found her in the morning, down and still, and I stood in the stall for a long time with my hand on her neck that was already going cold, and I thought about Dora who had ridden her, and I thought about 11 years, which is a long time to carry something, and I did not feel embarrassed about what my face was doing because there was no one there to see it. Except Marin came. She came in the same way she had in December, quiet, with the morning light now instead of a lantern. She looked at the mare and she looked at me and she didn't say anything, which was the right thing. She stood beside me and put her hand on my shoulder just there, just the weight of it, and left it. I don't know how long we stood like that. She's buried on the south side of the pasture, the bay, under the cottonwood where the ground is soft enough to dig. Polk and I put her there. Marin stood at the fence while we worked, and she wasn't crying, but her face had that quarried look it gets when she's feeling something she's decided to feel in private. Afterward, when we got back to the house, she made dinner without asking, and I sat at the table and watched her move around the kitchen, and I thought, a man could work his whole life and not deserve this and still get it. I thought, I intend to be worth it. We married in April. Not at the church, or at least not with a ceremony anyone made much fuss of, just Reverend Morse in his office with Ida and Polk as witnesses, 20 minutes, done. Marin wore the green dress. I wore my good coat. Ida cried. Polk, who does not believe in sentiment, blew his nose loudly into a handkerchief and pretended he was fighting a cold. Standing there in Morse's office with my hand and Marin's hand joined and Morse saying the words, I had a thought I have not had in a long time. It was a plain thought, nothing dressed up. I am glad to be alive. I had not thought that in 11 years. The county had opinions about Marin Voss, and for a while I heard them second-hand the way you hear everything second-hand in a county like this, through Celestina, through Polk, through Ida, who reported things with the bright-eyed pleasure of someone who has been waiting for a story. She's too tall, said the county. She's strange. She doesn't smile at the right times. She looks at people too straight. There's something about her. What there was about her, I could have told them. She had been before me, through something I only came to understand in pieces, over months, the way a man understands a country by riding its fences. Her husband had died badly in Omaha, not illness, something worse, and she had stayed anyway and worked and sent money to her mother in Hanover, and had done all of it without making it anyone else's business. She had come to this country at 22 and built herself a life out of what was available. She had come to me at 31 with one bag and a willingness to see what was here and make something of it. She did not need me. That was the thing the county could not account for. She was big enough and capable enough and had enough working in her head that she could have gone on without me. She chose not to. She chose this place and this spread and this particular rough-handed, silence-prone 53-year-old man, and she did it with her eyes open. And because she had her eyes open, the choosing meant something. When a woman who doesn't need you chooses to stay, that is the thing. That is the whole of it. Summer came on hard that year, the way it does in this part of Texas, with a heat that gets into the walls of the house and doesn't come out till midnight, and we worked through it together, Marin and I, fence line and barn and the books at the end of the week. The account she had taken over with a precision I'd never matched. The garden she'd started on the east side of the house in a patch of ground I'd written off as too dry. She had an arrangement with the irrigation ditch that I didn't entirely follow, but that resulted, by July, in a garden that produced more than the two of us could eat, and enough surplus that Celestina took some home twice a week. She worked like a man, and she had a tenderness she kept on a short leash and let out slowly, in particular moments. The way she'd stop by the roan stall in the evenings and just lay her hand flat on his neck, not making much of it, and the roan, who had not trusted anyone in 2 years, would stand still for her. The way she'd listen when I was talking, which I don't do often enough to be taken for granted, and give me her full attention, and sometimes at the end of what I'd said, she'd just nod once, that one nod, and that would be enough. I have known men who talked their whole lives and never felt heard. There's an evening I keep coming back to. Late August, the heat finally breaking a little after sundown. We'd had a long day, a good day, the kind where you're tired in the right way, and we were on the porch, the 2 chairs I'd put out there in spring that we'd taken to sitting in after dinner when the light went down. She had a book. I had nothing. I was just watching the sky do what it does at that hour out here, going from that high pale blue to the first green-gray of dusk. She said, not looking up from her book, "Paulk told me what you said, at the feed store, to that man." I didn't say anything. "He told me weeks ago," she said. I did not want to address it then. It was nothing. She looked up from the book, looked at me the way she does, direct, gray-eyed, seeing what's there. "It was not nothing," she said. "I watched the sky." She said, "I would like you to know that I did not write to this county looking for someone to defend me." She paused. "But I am glad you are the man who is." And then she went back to her book. I sat there in the cooling evening, and there was a dog barking somewhere off east toward the Prout place, and the first stars were coming out, and the grass smelled like it does at the end of summer, dried and clean, and I thought about a lot of things I won't try to put into words. What I'll tell you is this: I have spent most of my life being the kind of man that other men have no strong feelings about. Not disliked, not celebrated. Necessary in the way a fence post is necessary, reliable, unnoticed. Dora had loved me, Dora had been good to me, and I had loved her back, but even Dora, in the way of some marriages, had a manner of not quite seeing all the way to the thing I was. Marin looked all the way. I do not know what she saw, something worth staying for. Whatever it was, she saw it clear, with no haze of hope or need, with those gray, straight-looking eyes, and she said, "I'm staying." And in the end, for a man like me, that's the whole thing. I've got no way to tell you what the wrist spread looks like now without it sounding like I'm bragging, so I'll just tell you this: the books are better than they've been in a decade. The garden is going to kill us in squash by September. The roan, whose name is now officially Frank, which was not my idea, comes to the fence when he hears Marin cross the yard. There is, in the morning, always coffee made. I am 54 years old. My hands are still dirty in the creases. I've got a bad knee that started this spring that I have no intention of discussing with any doctor in Cutter's Fork, because it would give Roy Clendenin something to say. Last week I was up on the barn roof renailing a section of tin that had lifted in the July wind, and from up there I could see across the whole east pasture, the grass going gold in the afternoon, and I could see Marin in the yard below, hanging wash on the line, tall enough that she barely had to reach. She had her hair down because it was wash day and there was nobody around, and the wind took it a little, and she looked up at some reason I couldn't see, and then she looked up at me on the roof and shaded her eyes with her hand. She said something, the wind took it. I said, "What?" She said loud enough this time, "Come down when you are done. There is coffee." And she went back to the wash. I stayed up there another minute because the view was good, the grass, the sky, the spread that was mine and now hers, the woman in the yard who had come in on a Thursday stage with one bag and a look that sized a man up and found him worth staying for. The letter had said 5'4". I keep it in the Bible. I don't read it anymore. Some mistakes you don't correct because they turn out to be the best thing that ever came through your door.